it's really fun to see so many familiar faces and new faces as well. I'm calling in from Phoenix, Arizona, where it's turning into fall, and I think we've just dipping under 100 degrees. So it's sweater time in Phoenix. We're scheduled to go for 90 minutes. Am I correct, Reagan?
Yep.
And actually, I'm going to go over the agenda and the introductions in just a few minutes. But I want to talk just briefly about why I set this up and why I wanted to do this. I had felt that DE&I was being addressed in a lot of different parts of our communities, societies, and workplaces, but many times it's fragmented from other disciplines. For those of you who know about On the Mark and know what we do, we redesign companies and modernize their operating models. And we do that in a collaborative way. And I've been asking myself the question, how does DE&I come into that process of redesign and in basically embedding DE&I into an operating model? So we don't have a lot of answers, but I asked LaCoya and Shirley, invited them to be part of the conversation. And what our intent here is to just open up a dialogue, share with you our experiences around DE&I and collaboration and embedding those into an operating model. So that's it. Nothing more than that. Maybe we have some words of wisdom that you can learn from, but our hope is that collectively there's a lot of genius and on the call, and that we'll have 3 different dialogue sessions during our webinar where we'll also debrief and share with you any wisdom that we have, if any. So, and you'll be the judge of that. Shirley or LaCoya, you want to say anything before we do introductions about the intent?
I think you captured it well, Mark. I would just add, I love that you had this vision and appreciate that it came to fruition in the way that you did. I think, or the way that it did. I think it's a very timely and important topic, and just kind of want to give you a shout out for having the vision to do it.
Thank you, LaCoya. I appreciate it. Thank you, Shirley, and thank you both for being here. Well, let's. This is how we're going to spend our time. We're going to spend a minute or two introducing Shirley and LaCoya, and then we'll practically define diversity, equity, and inclusion and collaboration. And we'll also talk a little bit about why now, what's taken us so long, what are the forces going on that's bringing this to the surface. And then we're going to have 3 different dialogue sessions, one on unconscious bias, number 2 on workplace motivation to do something. Is there motivation in the workplace to do something? Number 3, making DE&I and collaboration real. And then some closing comments, and then wrap up and we'll be gone. So completely appreciate your joining us. And we look forward to hearing from you. Certainly you can ask questions along the way, or you can type them into the chat, but we'll take them any way that you have them or comments. LaCoya, how about we learn about who you are?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know you have a lot of options in terms of how you can spend your time on a Wednesday morning, particularly when it comes to webinars and things online. The options are boundless. So thank you for choosing to be with us this morning. My name is LaCoya Shelton. I'm the CEO of Revolutionary HR Consulting. And with that company, we work with organizations to develop talent management strategies that align with their business strategies and priorities. We also help to create conscious HR operating systems that really view the employment experience as part of the whole human experience. So we capture what HR does, we compare it to what's needed in order to create the HR that the business wants. So again, thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's my pleasure to be with you.
And LaCoya, that's why I introduced you to Tessa, as I think you and Tessa on the call here would have a good conversation, because the work that you both do is a nice overlap.
Oh, okay. We may have some synergies there. Yeah, hopefully we can connect afterwards.
Shirley, would you like to introduce who you are?
Yes, indeed. Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here and honored to be here with you. I work for Children's Miracle Network Hospitals. Have been with the company over 20 years. My goal was to be there 5 years and go back to Marriott because I just loved Marriott. But CMN gave me an opportunity to build a human resource department. So I wanted to do that and go back. And I got there and just fell in love. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the cause. I fell in love with the fact that on my worst day, just by going to work, I've made a difference in somebody's life. And that's not something that you can just get any place. And so here I am and proud to be there. I've held several roles within the organization, but I am so excited to be named the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Culture. Children's Miracle Network raises money for 170 hospitals in the US, Canada, and Puerto Rico. Last year, they raised over $400 million. And this is from corporate partners like Walmart, like Costco, and for different events and programs like Dance Marathon and Extra Life. And it really takes all of the efforts of all of the people in the community to make that happen. And it's just awesome to be part of it. And Mark has worked with us to help set us up so that we are even better at it in years to come. So we're excited to be here, excited to have this conversation with you, and look forward to learning from you as well. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you to you both. I'm grateful for you both being part of this conversation. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mark LaScola. I'm the managing principal of On the Mark, also founder. We've been in business now 32 years and pride ourselves on the fact that no one's done more operating model modernizations than we have. We're approaching 450 redesigns around the globe. And there's a lot of wisdom and scars that come with that. And my interest, again, as I said earlier, is really embedding DE&I into the redesign process and into operating models, which many of you on this call, we've had some similar experiences. Jade, we've worked together. Tessa, we've worked together. Irene, we've done some work together. Doug. So it's great to see many of you. And I think this conversation, I'm really looking forward to it and seeing what the richness comes out of it at the back end. So with that said, let's kind of give you a minute to kind of read some book definitions of diversity, equity, inclusion, and collaboration, and then we'll kind of talk about this and have Shirley talk about this practically. Give me a thumbs up when you've had a chance, you think you've read that. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Tessa. Excellent. Thanks, Anita, Jennifer, appreciate it. All right, Shirley, do you want to take the next slide if you don't mind?
Yes. I think Mark has great wisdom in with this conversation about DE&I, because the conversations have all been DE&I with everything that's going on in our society and on our news. We see it every day. But to add the collaboration, I think was just very, very wise, in that if you think about it, we can't be DE&I by ourselves. We can't be diverse by ourselves. We can't be equitable by ourselves. We can't be inclusive with ourselves. But collaboration gives us that ability to be, to integrate, to invite people into our space and to be invited into other spaces. And so to that end, one of the things that I think that we're really pushing to our staff is the definitions. And so to simplify it, this is just one way that we use in our training and onboarding to help people to quickly understand it, because there's a lot of questions, especially between equity and inclusion. And so diversity is really, what's our uniqueness? What is it that's unique about us? So when I look at myself and I say, you know what, I was born in Canada. My parents were in the military, so we moved every 3 years. You know, I came from people who had servants' hearts. And I am a Black over 40 single mother. There's a lot in there to unwrap with me. We all have that. And so it's really important as leaders to make sure that our people understand that we're all diverse. It's not just the book definition, for example, with what the federal government expects. It's that we're all diverse. And so really embracing that into your community is very important. Equity. So an example is equity, looking at that diverse community, is inviting someone to a meeting. And Mark invited all of you to this meeting, and you took advantage of it. And then inclusion is, once they're at the meeting, is inviting them to speak, inviting them to be heard, just like we're going to do as we break out into our sessions. And then back to collaboration again, it's working together to do something great. It's working together, which is really what binds all of us to DE&I.
Any reflections from anyone before we move forward? Any thoughts, any questions, reflections?
Yeah, Mark, actually, I do have a thought as we go through this. One of the things that really resonated with me was a concept I think that was, I don't know if it was, it's certainly brought to me by Pat Waters, you know, the CHRO from ServiceNow, and her what really resonates with me is around belonging, including in here. So the feeling that someone gets when they're diversity, when they feel like they're on a team. And I think we can all relate to that, and their talents, you know, are brought out in that scenario, like where they are feeling like they're belonging. And so I feel like some of that is in these four concepts, but it's certainly something that we talk about at Pocket Outdoor Media, is making sure that we have the belonging, that feeling. And that's hard. I mean, it's hard for us. I'm really interested in anyone else who has sort of gotten people to talk about their stories, talk about their uniqueness, so that they feel comfortable and their talents are really brought out into the organization.
Jade, I'll first of all, thank you for that. And I can't agree. I violently agree with you about belonging and connectedness. And it's a particularly interesting comment in this environment of the pandemic, where we're doing this kind of work virtually. You know, there's a whole nother webinar around that, but that belonging and connectedness, I think, is so critical. Let me give you a real practical example, which I think might illustrate this. Recently at On the Mark, we had some events happen that were a bit traumatic, might be over dramatic, but were challenging for us. And one of the first things we did after we kind of all caught our breath was to bring in a consultant who we've worked with many times, and actually just start the conversation of what's it like to be in your shoes. Like, we didn't want to fix anything. It's like, just tell us who you are, what you're about, and what's it like to be in, because we're all getting bombarded. As you well know, Jade, on the Mark team, we travel all over the world. We spend a lot of time together. And now in this pandemic environment, we're doing all of our work virtually, just like all of you are, well, I'm assuming. And I felt like that environment plus the event has really challenged us to how do we connect, and how do we feel like we belong, and how do we start that process of re-belonging. And I think your words resonated with me in terms of that intervention and what we're doing with our team at this point in time. So any other comments in response to Jade's comments? Thanks for sharing that, Jade. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would just add, I think that was spot on, Jade, you know, what you said, particularly, you know, around that belonging. and that inclusivity part, because on an individual level, neuroscience has already established that being excluded actually registers as pain in the brain.
Right.
So there's an actual physiological response. We're all seeking acceptance and respect. So I think that I just want to underscore your comment about that importance of that sense of belonging and that inclusivity part.
I will hi, Julia, it's great to see you.
Hello, good afternoon, Mark. Hello, good afternoon at my end here. I came in a bit late, so I'm catching up. That's all right, hold on,
no worries. One of the experiences that I want to share with you, and Shirley, maybe you can comment on this. The Children's Miracle Network Hospital, we had the honor of taking through a redesign process. That was probably the most inclusive and transparent redesign process that we have ever done in our 32 years of history. Everything was above board, and I thought the one unique thing about Children's Miracle Network Hospitals, and you heard it from Shirley's introduction, is the purpose and the mission of Children's Miracle Network Hospitals is so compelling and so heartfelt and so honorable that, coupled with the inclusion and transparency of the redesign effort, I think only, and Shirley, you can talk more about this firsthand, but I thought it was a nice equation to build greater belongingness and connectedness with team members. Shirley, do you want to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but do you want to add any insight there?
I do. One of the things that Mark taught us was that when you invite people in, there's still issues you're going to have. When you don't invite people in, there are still issues you're going to have. People not feeling invited, or I wasn't in as much. I would say that I am really proud of our CEO, who is very much about being inclusive and inviting people to be part of the conversation. And if you couldn't be part of the conversation, or not everybody was at the table in the room, there was still a follow-up that would happen where you could go and walk and you could look at everything, and you could have people there that could answer questions for you. So it was phenomenal thing that took place. But the funny part of it was you still had people that said, but I wasn't in the room to help get this dot up on the wall, and I wasn't there to make this happen. And so it was a good learning there, but I would say transparency is key. And as we go through DEI, that is going to be a big part of it as well, to help people understand and embrace and understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I think that what Mark did was a great example for us, and really helped us as we're going into our DEI as well.
All right, well, let's move on. So let's go to what has taken us so long to get here, and some of the driving forces that are happening that we need to kind of pay attention to. I think LaCoya or Shirley, I was going to start this conversation. I do think for each of you on this call, you can come up with 2 or 3 things that are kind of saying, why now? I love the way Shirley put it, which is in LaCoya, which is what's taken us so long to get here. There's so many things that are going on, but one of the things that I want to highlight from the organization design and the organization development field, particularly from the organization design field, is this thing called the future of work. The future of work, you hear a lot of people talking about different ways of working, flattening organizations, working in the agile kind of way. But what's missing in the context of that conversation, I think personally, is the DE&I and the collaboration. And Julia, I can see that smile on your face. You probably see the same thing from where you do your work. I think the future of work is much broader than just changing generational expectations of our youth, expecting something greater and more fulfilling and more meaningful in the work that they do at the workplace. But I'm going to be quiet there because I'm going to say more about that in just a second. Maybe invite Shirley and or LaCoya to talk about some of the drivers and forces that we have to pay attention to.
I was just going to add a point. Can I just come in and add a point?
Of course you can, Julia.
Around the why. I mean, traditionally, organizations have been very much around looking at the stakeholder, shareholder value and shareholder value. If we take the concept that today, going forward in the future of work, that everyone is a stakeholder, and taking into account all those other aspects you talked around, you can therefore start to look at, what is the value each individual brings to the organization. But also, if you look more broadly, externally, and look at the wider ecosystem, then you can start to say, well, these are the, you can start to list what those value propositions are, and hopefully be able to measure those.
Indeed. Shirley, LaCoya, anything?
What I would say is that because there is so much pent up frustration in our people and concern in our people and not knowing kind of which way to turn, that as leaders, we have the opportunity to kind of help mine some of that out and to give our people a safe place to be able to talk about what's happening within our world that's gotten us to really embrace DE&I. I think I want to encourage us to really start by having conversations with our staff that let them get out what they're feeling. They are pent up. I'll just give you an example. We have done what are staff chats, and we just ask staff, hey, if you just want to talk, just share what's on your mind. How are you feeling? What's going on? And I was really thinking, and this was after George Floyd, I was really thinking, we'd hear a lot around that, and we did. But what shocked me was how many of the younger group in our organization came forward with things that they're having conversations with their parents, and for the first time realized their parents and them were not aligned and felt that their parents were racist, and I cannot believe that was my parents, and I can't believe how much, and I was so shocked by the emotion that came out of that. And so what I'm saying is that as you're working on your program and you're working to bring folks together, you need to give them a place to share, and that's safe. We don't have the answers. I didn't have the answers for any of that, but just them being able to speak to it and speak to each other about it is really important. So as we're looking at this, we want to move forward, but give it a chance to sit and for the staff to lean into it before you move on.
Yeah.
Almost going back to Jay's comment around belonging, which is how do you start to create that connection?
Yep.
Any comments, LaCoya?
Yeah, I just wanted to add onto that in addition to creating that space, part of what we can do to help support these transitions, this national reckoning that we're all dealing with and that's coming to fruition, is to make sure that we're trying to help employees recognize and embrace their individual power for change, because we all have that. And I believe it was Julia that mentioned earlier, stakeholder orientation. When businesses evolve and really have that orientation toward their stakeholder, that view that really there are multiple groups that the business is serving, by really having that more conscious, again, stakeholder orientation, then we can begin to see how what it is we're doing, even within our organizations, are impacting everything around us. We can begin to see that, and that we can use to help individuals again start to recognize and embrace that individual power that they have for change.
Yeah, and LaCoya, if I can also come in and just add, you'd be giving people to recognize their own power and to challenge some of those unconscious biases or stereotype comments that would come out, I think is a good opportunity if you have a diverse group of people in the room. That's where you can start to have bring up some of those issues and challenges and hopefully overcome those. Yeah. But if it's put aside in the corner and only talked about at a very superficial level, then you're not addressing the issue.
Right. Yeah.
Let me just take a minute and welcome my friend and colleague, G. Winter. G, it's good to see you. Anything you want to add, G, from your perspective on things you're seeing from your view?
Thank you, Mark, and hello, everyone. I'm really grateful for this conversation. And the thing that's striking me now to insert would be that I'm especially thankful that you put this slide up after you talked about Shirley, you gave the thumbnail sketch of the definitions, because On the Mark has added, or someone has added here, collaboration in this conversation. What I'm sensing in some of the work that I have right now with state education, and is the conversation is even more important right now, because we have to work on effective teaming in remote or hybridized work environments. So while DEI is part of the recovery in this COVID environment, we have the press also, I think, of effective conversations when they're in new technology bases. So being heard, being seen has an even deeper and more important role to play in the DEI conversations. I hope that's making sense, but it's like, I'm not in the room with you. And so that's another element of this. There's vulnerability to these conversations. And so it's heightened even in a remote-based Zoom meeting or whatever that is so prevalent right now. But it's the collaboration element that keeps us hopeful that we will have and continue to deepen these conversations starting from where we are now.
At the risk of, I'm going to go right up to the edge and then I'm going to stop. But and it's always easier to see another country reckoning rather than our own. And I'm going to address, or at least take us right up there. Last week in the UK, there was a report that came out from the National Building Historical Society that talked about the role that slavery played in building all of the highly regarded mansions and houses in the UK. I'm probably not articulating this. And of course, instead of just acknowledging that, some people got mad at the National Historic Society for bringing it up and saying these are national treasures. How can you bring that up? I'm not going to do the conversation any justice. However, I want to pivot that over to the US, which is, we all know that, the undiscussable in the room is that in many ways, politically, socially, we're seeing the rise of white nationalism, racism, and it's hard not to pay attention to it. When I first met G in the late 80s, early 90s, G, we were talking then about the importance of inclusion and at least collaboration and using teams to work together, and social injustice in the criminal justice system. And I'm thinking to myself, we're still here and we're still wrestling with it, and here in the US. And so I think every country has that challenge in their own way. So it's not just the UK, it's not just the US, but we won't go any deeper into the political elements of that, but we all know that we're getting bombarded with that on a day-to-day basis. I have my oldest daughter is LGBTQ, and she's in a relationship with her non-binary partner. And, I have to worry about her safety just being different, since she lives in a part of the country where, there are those kinds of challenges that are right out in the open going on. And so I just think to myself, wait a sec, is that who we are? Mm-hmm. Is that who we are, not only as a country, but also how do we translate this into a workplace?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's keep rocking and rolling. Good conversation. I'm gonna, if I can just, there we go. I just want to highlight one thing for those of you who are in the organization development space. The last paragraph here. Organization development discipline was founded on, its founding principles and values were things like inclusion, fairness, transparency of information flow, choice. And one of the things that we're seeing in the field of organization development is a reckoning of how far they have moved away from those values. And I think those founding values fit nicely with DE&I and collaboration. And from my own unique perspective, I also see this struggle going on in other disciplines that we need to be aware of. And I just wanted to call that out. And there's a lot of things being posted. For those of you who know Gary Magnifico, who's from the Pepperdine Organization Development Program, just wrote a whole piece article on that reckoning, and I think it's worth a read on LinkedIn. If you want the resource, I can help find it. Just drop me an email. All right, well, let's pass it off here to LaCoya. LaCoya, you want to take us into dialogue one?
Yeah, I did that. And I saw that a former colleague of mine, and Lori is on the call too. So I just wanted to give a shout out to her and say thanks for joining us. So yeah, let's talk about bias, and more specifically implicit bias, which that essentially refers to those attitudes and beliefs that occur outside of our conscious awareness and control. So we know that there are tons of articles that are out on this topic of implicit bias, and those articles identify the impact of those biases largely on those more traditional HR processes, like things that occur in the employee life cycle. And that's a significant topic for sure, because given that far-ranging and far-reaching impact that bias in employment systems have. So it's important to talk about that. However, we realize now more than ever that there is a broader impact to our lives and to our communities, both within and outside of work, those impacts that implicit bias has. So before we lead into our dialogue on bias, let's first take a look at and consider several of those known unconscious biases that really directly impact us as individuals and as members of our organization. So you can see on the slide there a number of different biases: affinity bias, tendency to warm up to people like ourselves, the halo effect, when we think everything about a person is good because you like that person. So I'll let you read through the rest of these. I just want to kind of highlight a few of them. The perception bias, that's our general tendency to form stereotypes. And then groupthink is when people try too hard, essentially, to fit into a particular group by mimicking others and at the expense of their own thoughts and their own opinions. So these biases really influence decisions made at all levels, across all jobs, within all types of industries and organizations. And moreover, they have implications for very specific and significant components of the whole employee life cycle, not limited to, but including talent acquisition or recruiting, training and development, workforce planning, performance management systems, all of those, and those feed into compensation. It may feed into actual reduction in force, layoff decisions, and all of those experiences then, of course, form and inform and create the culture as well. So they all have, we know that bias has impact in all of those areas in the employment life cycle, but where else does bias have impact? What about the customer experience? We talked about a little bit earlier that stakeholder orientation. What about the impact on our stakeholders? What's really the organizational impact beyond that to technology innovation? What's that impact that implicit bias essentially has on our communities, the communities in which our customers and our clients live and work in, those communities that we also live and work in. So that's what this part of the dialogue is about. We have 4 questions that really comprehensively examine that impact of bias in all aspects of the business and how we work. And as Mark mentioned earlier, how the future of work, it can be shaped essentially based on our greater understanding and our acknowledgement essentially of the implications of unconscious bias. So through this dialogue, we want to uncover opportunities for you for how you can integrate DE&I into your operating model. as the way that you do business, the way we do business. So going beyond just the talent management arena, recognizing it is significant and important, and again, has broader implications, but thinking beyond that, where are the impacts of the biases outside of those areas? So what questions resonated with folks? First, I'd like to know that. What questions did you gravitate toward?
I can start. We were breakout session 1, and we focused very much on question number 2, just talking about individuals operating within the organization. And we had a discussion about how do you create belonging? How do you allow folks to feel like they're belonging? And Irene from our group, she came up with some really poignant questions that I wrote down and I'm going to definitely lose. And that's, what happens when you take a risk in this organization, and who feels unsafe here? And I just thought those are really good. It really, we just kind of talked about that. Like, how do you, like, that's just having the conversation and being really revealing that. And then what do you do about it? How do you, and we talked about leaders and how leaders need to set that culture, that environment where we can start to understand who doesn't feel safe, and what we need to do to make that belonging happen.
Yeah, so Lee, you talk about psychological safety is certainly a component of this.
Yeah, definitely. And we talked about psychological safety, but we also really felt like that can get a little biased too. So it was more about belonging. We were trying to, Virginia was talking about that. But definitely we were talking about how do we create that feeling.
Yeah. Well, I love that you touched on the cultural aspect and the environment, because those are excellent questions and excellent to be asked. However, if you're in an environment where people don't feel that they can answer that authentically, or they don't have a mechanism by which they can answer and something is actually going to happen as a result of them providing that input, then, you know, whether the questions are brilliant or not, you may not get the engagement that you're looking for, and then may not be able to unanchor ourselves, you know, from the old. And when we don't do that, right, when we're anchored in the past, it really threatens us with irrelevancy as people. So excellent, love that. What else? What else? Other questions that people gravitated toward? Did anyone lean into question 1, for example? Or 3? What about that impact of diversity, or excuse me, what about that kind of common theme that we see in a lot of businesses where the diversity of the workforce is reflective of population or the customer base, but only up to a certain level? And then as we go higher in the organization, we see that start to kind of thin out or disappear altogether. How might those biases we talked about, did anybody kind of have a chance to talk about that? Or have thoughts to share now?
Someone share with us something, some aspect of the conversation they had.
Oh, and I see the chat room is busy.
So I don't know, can you hear me please? It's Julia Flower here. We looked at question number 4, but just before I go into question number 4, were you asking for anyone to give their views on question number 3, or are you really asking for people who talked about question number 3 in the breakout groups?
Oh no, please share your perspective on whatever question you like, whichever one resonated.
Okay, so we both liked question 3 and 4. Marcella was in my group. For question number 3, I think the issue I was going to say would, from my perspective, from an organization design perspective, at the very bottom end, it's very easy to bring in task-oriented type work where it is less operational, where you expect, so to give you an example, if somebody's more customer facing, then that level of activity is very easy for you to pull from the marketplace. When you start to get into much more skilled work and much more strategic work, that is where you start to see a thinness of diversity. And I believe that the reason for that is to do with the leadership group that you have in place. Perhaps that there's a lot of bias at that level. The question is, how diverse are those groups? And maybe it's looking at making sure you can get a number of people in that conversation from a recruitment perspective, but also from giving people visibility and giving people opportunities to be part of projects or activities, and to enable them to gain expertise through performance management or schemes that they have in place. And that's for question number 3, very briefly talking about that one. But in terms of question number 4, which is the one we covered off on, my view is we talked around, and I think it's more to do with, from an organization perspective, when organization designers are designing from a diagnostics perspective, what considerations are being taken into account? Who is involved in that diagnostics process? Do you have a diverse team of people who are organizing? And also getting into those processes. I mean, what design principles have been taken into account? So I think that there were quite a few things we talked around in that space there. Marcella, do you want to come in and add something?
I guess you kind of cover it, but what I was saying is sometimes it's a challenge to engage leaders in this type of conversations, helping them to see the need to buy into the benefits of the process. Actually designing a process, we were talking about principles, and I said a lot of the time that I try to help them, they just want to see something done, and it's a very kind of check the boxes exercise. So just engaging them in that type of conversation, helping them see that there is a need, and as I was saying in the chat, helping them see the elephant in the room, like everyone is seeing it. God, is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I was saying, when you look at methodologies and design principles and design itself, you generally have a set of people who have their own biases in terms of how organizations should be designed. So in a nutshell, maybe just summarizing, it's about making sure that you have a diverse range of people from different levels in the organization be part of that process, so their voices can be heard, they can bring their perspectives, you get a better richness, you get diversity of thought in that process. And also in terms of when you're looking at talent again and mobility, how do you ensure that your pool, rather than just have the same sort of people you're attracting into the organization to particular roles, how do you ensure in today's world where people are mobile, mobility is an issue, should that still be an issue today? You can attract from various, the way we work in our hybrid organization, so we can look at it from that perspective, is there an opportunity therefore to say, right, if you are a single mother and you live 40 miles away, you need to only come in 1 day a week and you can work 3 days at home as an example, because there's, you can then design the job role around those issues around mobility, and then that's just one example.
LaCoya, can I ask a question?
You bet.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Marcella. It's good to see you as well. Anyone, as I read and consider unconscious bias, it makes me reflect and think of where those biases in the way I see the world. Did anyone or does anyone want to share kind of one of the biases that you're personally wrestling with as you look through your lens of the workplace? Because we all have them, and maybe someone we haven't heard from. And I think we all have them, so don't be shy, please. Somebody share something where you're wrestling with maybe a bias, or is it a bias, or
Mhm, mhm.
Anyone?
I'll jump in. I find myself kind of locating people in terms of educational background. And I know within that there is more than an implicit bias that I have been not called out by others on, but have experienced some remorse afterwards for asking that question even.
Doug, first of all, thank you for sharing that. I too have a similar lens and bias in that way as well that I wrestle with. Anyone else before we move forward to the next set of questions? One more.
Me too, and I think sometimes is the universe just puts you, if you believe in that, the universe just puts you in the place for that. So I tend to dismiss very easily academics, and I work at a university, as you guys know. So I struggle constantly because my manager is now an academic, and she's like, "Oh, we should invite with this professor from here and there." I'm like, "Really? Do they know about this?" So anyway, yeah, I'm working through my biases.
Thank you, Marcella.
This is
Can
Irene.
I just add-
I want to piggyback off what Doug said, because what I noticed in the workplace, I worked at a mining company, and in order to make things better, you needed to go to the people who did the job. And the people who did the job didn't have the education, perhaps. They were general workers, and you had leaders making all the decisions about how it should be, how it should work. This is how it's going to work better. And they didn't even know the answer, but they refused to go to the people who did because they weren't part of a certain group. And
Yeah, it's crazy,
it was a
isn't
big
it, Irene?
challenge.
You know, Irene, actually, as you're talking, I was actually thinking of the work that Fred Emery did and others back in the late 50s on the Norwegian mining company, and basically where they came up with socio-technical systems. Marcella, you're in the STS group, but the whole basis for redesigning organizations based on people who do the work doing the redesign because they have the local knowledge and how things work. It's like, really, we're still wrestling with that 70 years later.
Yep. Is that ridiculous?
It is ridiculous to me. And I just think, gosh, maybe I'm just naive and we should be doing so much better than what we are. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna keep us moving to the next set of dialogue questions, and I'm gonna fast forward here to, and just for this, in the spirit of time, I'm going to have Shirley set this up, and then we'll set you up into a set of for conversations or a dialogue. Shirley, do you want to start?
So Mark, I'm sorry, I really want to respond to Marcella really quickly about her leadership concerns and her executive leadership concerns. And I want to, anything that you can do to get the right people in front of those leaders is very important. The staff is watching, and if your leaders are not leaning into it, it's not important. And so that's going to hurt the program overall. We're doing executive training, and I was able to, I hired someone to come in. I know I can say the same thing. I know my company would believe me because they are leaning in, but it's having that different voice that's important. But also, again, the staff is watching, and if the leaders aren't doing their part, that's gonna just definitely hurt. So I'm thinking about, because that's a pretty tough one.
Well, it's actually, it's a nice lead-in, Shirley, to, is there an appetite within the organization to do anything different? So how about you take us into that?
Okay, well, Mark and I are going to do this together, and it is important to understand, is there an appetite in the organization? What is that appetite? So are we just saying the words, or are we really looking to do something? And what does that mean? It is, how are we tethering DEI to our mission statement? We have a responsibility to our customers. We have a responsibility to our intergenerational staffs. We have our mission, vision, values, and we have our strategy. And so DE&I is something we're bringing in that's going to enhance all of that and make that better for us. But what does that look like, and what is it that we need to do to also stay authentic to ourselves? One of the things with DE&I, it's very personal. You know, when you think about the mission that you have, our mission is to raise funds and awareness for children's hospitals. It's a mission that the staff gets behind and people want to know about before they get there. That's what, so they'll know about your company coming in. But when it comes to DE&I, it's helping the staff understand how that's going to better that mission, and to really connect those dots and tether that mission statement to the overall. However, because people are coming in with their own thoughts and their own thinking and their own values, sometimes what the company is doing with DE&I and what the staff believe with DE&I is very different. So we just have 3 questions. They're very generic questions because I don't want to build them up. I just wanted you just to have a conversation about them, to really speak to, so what do we do when there's differences and how do we handle that? And what is the organization's responsibility to staff that think differently than us? For example, probably some of your staff felt that after some of the racism that's been happening on the streets, that you as an organization should be out marching. So we had communities that thought that Children's Miracle Network should be out marching. We had you know, some of our staff that felt that we should stop fundraising and go and do that. So let's have a conversation about what is the responsibility of the organization, and what is the responsibility that we have to meet the goal to add DE&I, but also to ensure that our staff understands what we're doing and why there are differences. And then Mark, I'm going to throw it to you.
So basically, we've got a list of questions there. Pick one that you maybe want to discuss, and we're going to give you, or 1 or 2 that you want to discuss. We're going to give you about 10 minutes to have a conversation. You know, we have a lot of wisdom that on the mark over our 30 years in doing business. One of them is you can't push a rope, and which then equates nicely to question number 4, which is there an appetite or any motivation to do something different in the workplace? And Irene, this comes back to your statement that you made about in the mining company that you were part of at one point. And so I think the question that I really like that Shirley raised was, how do you work in an organization without losing who you are and staying true to your beliefs? And I think we live in contradictions sometimes, or we live in those places. One of my favorite questions, but pick a question and we'll throw you into a group.
Kind of make this more of a general feedback, but give us feedback. You know, what did you discuss in your circles? What are things that we can take away? What are things that we can apply to our areas of responsibility when we get off this phone? So talk to us about, what did you discuss, and what are some takeaways from your discussion? How do we remain genuine and authentic when DE&I can be, you know, very heavy company, but doesn't really pay as much attention to I as an individual? What are the things that you would suggest that are needed or that will help staff with that?
Peggy. Peggy, can you hear us?
Yes. All right, I'm taking off the camera. I look terrible. It was a long hike with the dog this morning.
You look fantastic, and you're among friends, so go.
So where what I really liked was at the opening conversation, we talked about what are the behaviors, if you will, or values or culture that drives DEI, about belongingness, connectedness. I would add in its self-awareness, listening skills, and valuing different perspectives. So I think that a lot of times the roadblock in a company can be the culture. And my example is, I had worked at GAF roofing manufacturing, owned privately. They had McKinsey do a great inclusion program that played well in New York City. Then they took it to some of the plants. And my little my little story is, as I was facilitating a leadership development program with all men, that's okay. One of the men, and I talked about team effectiveness, one of the leaders from a plant in one of our southern states said, you know, the problem that's happened to our plant is they've let women come in. And when it's hot out, they can't even handle the weight, and everybody has to pick up the slack. So I look at, you know, how can this be? And there's so much of a local environment there that I think needs to address the perspectives and the self-awareness, and that the I, respecting everyone's I, if you will, as key to really putting forth that we value diversity on all levels.
Thanks for that.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing that. Do you have commitments in your diversity plan, Peggy?
At GAF, no.
Okay.
And with the commitments, so the commitments are a more diverse slate from a recruiting perspective.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of, to me, and this came up in our breakout, you know, the commitments or the numbers, I feel like that takes me back to, you know, the age of affirmative action with numbers. So, and I think, you know, for the business, it's about, it's really about, you know, does the business value different perspectives, creativity, innovation? If they do, that brings all voices to the table.
Correct.
And it gets the different perspectives. And my concern is that if it's a very top-down organization, no matter what, people will not speak up. And certainly if you feel unwelcome or feel that there's a wall anyhow, you're really going to shut down. So I think to me, what's at the heart of the culture, and why do we value this, and why is it so much better for us to?
You know, speaking of those contradictions, Peggy, did anyone discuss question 2, which is what happens when you work in an organization where there's beliefs and practices differ from your own, and how do you cope? Did anyone?
Yeah.
And how do you not lose who you are? Anyone discuss that? Any insight? G, can I put you on the spot? Would you mind if you're affirming, shaking your head? Would you mind just sharing a little wisdom?
Actually, I was hoping that Julia might. She did speak quite a bit to this question. And can I softball it to you, Julia? Or I could, you know, take a pitch as an individual. We did take on that question.
It's yours, G. How about giving us a summary?
All right. Well, you know, there's such richness, and I mean, my art is questioning. So I love all these questions. So we did take that one on, and I must say, I feel a little bit bad. Dafra didn't get airtime to really share. I have to get that out. But the how to not lose yourself is, you know, if you examine your own personal learning first in terms of these questions. So being self-employed, I'm already at a privilege to, you know, say yes or no in certain circumstances where I wish to work or I don't wish to work. Obviously, economics come into play. But, you know, so it's different for me than if I was embedded in an organization. So I don't find myself having to tussle too much with losing myself in my work, losing myself in my organization, because basically my beliefs, my values are my organization. And so that's, you know, that's not a rich answer, I don't think, for this question. I would prefer to hear from someone who is embedded in an organization where they tussle with that more than I have.
Well, I can share from my experience, having been a member of an organization that values and beliefs ran counter to my own, and it creates a state of dissonance. It's quite difficult. I like to compare culture sometimes to a haunted house in terms of it's all encompassing. It can take you over. It can create behaviors that you would not support outside of the organization, but it's normalized within it. And so then you kind of adopt or take on, some of those aspects. So in terms of what to do about that, at least from my experience, there are, like a lot of us, we have to make some decisions about goodness of fit and where we see ourselves going forward. Is it something, I can't remember that saying that says, Lord, please grant me the wisdom to know the things I can't change, grant me the strength. I think it's a serenity prayer. Grant me the strength to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to, recognize the things that I can't. And so I think in a lot of ways as individuals, it absolutely comes down to first recognizing that there's that disparity, and then examining your options and making decisions about what to do about it.
LaCoya, I think as you say that, and G, as you make your comments, I think of the role that hope and faith plays versus despair in for all of us.
Yeah.
And when you use that term, the wisdom to know the differences. Sometimes I'm like, gee, I think, well, I have some control over what it is that I do or we do. But at the same time, which is how do you show up, not lose who you are, and have hope and faith that things can improve versus despair, which, then beats us into a different level of submission and compliance that I think is dangerous for all of us. And then we lose who we are. I want to be, speaking of biases, unfortunately, we have to work within time, and our commitment has been 90 minutes to you and not take any more of your valuable time. There's a whole discussion around unconscious bias, around time and use of time as a resource, but we're not going to take that on today. So that's my lousy transition to kind of basically saying maybe we can get a couple of closing comments. Let's first go to LaCoya, any closing comments, and Shirley, and I'd like to hear from anyone on the call before we close up and pass off to Reagan to close it up. Shirley, anything, or LaCoya?
Yes, I just want to leave you with a saying that I heard from Claudia Chan. She wrote the book, This Is How We Rise. And when she talks about DE&I, she put it this way: diversity, equity, and inclusion is simply humanity. And as we leave, just remember that as we go through this, it is about humans, and it is about us being good, as doing unto others as we'd have us do unto others. But that it is about humanity, it's about humans. We're gonna make mistakes, we're gonna fall down, but at the end of the day, we are human, and that's also the thing that brings us together, collaborates us, and lifts us up.
Yeah, I would add that we know it's not it's the right thing to do, to Shirley's point, and bearing in mind it also DE&I also can create a strategic and financial advantage, right? Because we create a certain environment, and I think that's something for us to remember going forward, keeping in front of mind, is tying that to the business case. There's tons of data out there to support claims around what businesses can see and expect by having a more diverse workforce, ranging from increased productivity, strengthening an employer's position in the employment marketplace, creating and fostering an environment that encourages innovation that can lead to better sales, better client relationships. Tons of data out there already on that. So keeping that in mind, because we can replicate buildings, we can replicate strategy, you can replicate technology, but what you get out of it is always going to be different based on the uniqueness of your people, based on the environment that you create. So again, bearing in mind that there is that critical connection to our workplace and the future of our workplace, we can, as we're articulating the social responsibility aspect, the social expectation aspect of DE&I, that it is going to translate to a branding image. It does translate to actual bottom line business results. Important to keep that in mind and make those critical connections.
And I'd like to invite anyone closing comments from any of our colleagues on the call. Anyone?
I would just like to come back and say that organizations should think of all employees as stakeholders and not just people who just do the work. And I think if they take that perspective, then they can see the value in terms of what value do people bring, not just internally, but also outside of the organization.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else? Well, I personally want to say thank you for taking 90 minutes of your valuable time and spending it with us. We've got some articles that we've just used. These will be in the that we put on here into the webinar, into the slides. And Reagan, I'm going to pass it off to you to close it up.
Wonderful. Well, I'll just second what Mark said. Thank you so much for joining us. It was really wonderful hearing everyone's perspective, and it is a conversation, so it's great to see everyone participating. If you want to talk any more about organization design, we do have a monthly Ask Me Anything session that is taking place on October 28th. So we'll provide these in slides, but you can sign up for that. And then Mark is also doing a webinar with the organization design community on November 19th for going way beyond strategic design and how to actually implement things into the operating model. So again, we hope to stay in touch and see all your faces on another webinar soon. But thank you for joining. It was really wonderful.